Welcome to Versus Chronicles, The Infinite Fight, the show where heroes clash, villains rise, and legends are made. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a matchup that's sure to get you pumped.
I'm the expert, and yeah, this one's a real head-scratcher.
We're talking about two of the most iconic shapeshifters in comic book history, Marvel's Sandman and DC's Clayface.
Both can transform their bodies into practically anything.
But their powers, their personalities, their whole vibes are completely different.
It's like comparing apples and oranges, except both the apples and oranges can turn into weapons.
We've got their character bios and a whole versus battle analysis to dig into.
And trust me, there's a lot to unpack.
So the big question we're tackling today is this. If Sandman and Clayface ever went head-to-head, who would come out on top?
And how?
Exactly. How would this battle of the malleable masters even go down?
To answer that, we need to understand who these guys are, beneath all that shifting sand and morphing clay.
Okay, so let's rewind back to their origins. Who are these guys before they got all superpowery?
Let's start with Sandman real name, Flint Marko. He's your classic Marvel baddie with an origin story straight out of 1960s sci-fi.
Okay, I'm picturing radioactive spiders and cosmic rays. What did Sandman get mixed up in?
Picture this, an escaped convict on the run stumbles onto a beach that's just been used for a nuclear test.
Oh no, that can't be good.
And bam! He gets bombarded with radiation and gains the ability to control sand?
Yikes. So he's like a walking embodiment of Cold War anxieties, the fear of nuclear fallout and all that.
Exactly. He's like the Hulk, but with sand instead of gamma rays.
Okay, so Sandman is science gone wrong. Now what about Clayface? His origin is a bit more out there, right?
Oh yeah, Clayface, the original one, at least Basil Carlo was an actor driven mad by his failing career.
Oh, so it's like a psychological thriller kind of origin.
Absolutely. It starts with disguises and murder, a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost fame. But later versions of Clayface get actual shape-shifting powers, usually through some kind of chemical accident.
So it becomes less about masks and makeup and more about this full-body transformation.
Yeah, and it gets really grotesque, leaning into full-on body horror. It's fascinating how each new Clayface takes that concept of losing yourself literally and figuratively even further.
It's like this thread of identity runs through all the Clayfaces. It becomes about more than just changing shape. It's about this monstrous transformation that reflects some deep inner turmoil. So we've got science gone wrong for Sandman and a descent into madness for Clayface. I'm guessing these backstories really influence how their powers work.
100%. Sandman's powers are all about brute force. He can shift his form at will, turn his body as hard as rock or flow like sand, and he can even use the sand around him to grow to enormous sizes.
Wait, isn't he basically immortal too? As long as there's a speck of dust, he can pull himself back together.
Pretty much. You can blast him, scatter him, grind him to dust, but as long as there's some sand left, he'll just reform. It makes him incredibly difficult to truly defeat.
Okay, so Sandman is the unstoppable force.
Yeah.
Now, what about Clayface? What makes him so tricky?
Clayface is less about overwhelming strength and more about unsettling versatility. I mean, besides near-perfect mimicry, he's got super strength, crazy elasticity, and heals ridiculously fast. Plus, depending on the version, he might even have toxic properties.
Hold on, toxic. Like poisonous to the touch? That's taking shapeshifting to a whole new terrifying level.
Right. Some versions have a chemical origin that makes them highly toxic. Just adds to his already creepy arsenal. Clayface is a master manipulator, not just of his form, but of people's perceptions. He can literally get under your skin.
Okay, so we've got Sandman, the unstoppable force, versus Clayface, the ultimate deceiver. I'm already getting a sense of how their fighting styles would be totally different.
Totally. Sandman is all about brawling. He wants to get up close and personal, overwhelm his opponents with sheer size and strength. It's almost like he's forced to be this blunt instrument because he can't fully control his sandy form.
Interesting. So his powers are as much a curse as a gift. Now, Clayface, I bet he's all about stealth and psychological warfare.
Absolutely. Being able to perfectly mimic anyone, he's a master of infiltration and exploiting weaknesses. He could become anyone sound like anyone. He could turn into your closest friend or loved one and completely shatter your sense of reality.
Wow, talk about getting under your skin literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this difference in fighting styles would play a huge role in their hypothetical showdown.
No doubt. If they were to duke it out in, say, a wide-open desert, Sandman would be in his element, unlimited sand to manipulate the ability to create massive sandstorms. He'd be a force of nature.
But wouldn't an urban environment be Clayface's playground? All those shadows to hide in crowds to blend into, you could turn the city itself into a weapon?
You got it. It's not just about raw power. It's about who can best exploit the environment and their opponent's weaknesses.
This is getting me hyped for the main event. But before we jump into who would win, I want to dig into some of their most iconic battles and really showcase what they're capable of in a one-on-one fight.
Perfect timing, because there are some classic showdowns that really highlight their strengths. For Sandman, his very first fight against Spider-Man back in Amazing Spider-Man #4 is legendary.
The one where he almost won, right?
Yep. It really established him as a major threat in the Marvel Universe.
I can see why Spider-Man relies so much on agility and web slinging, and then you've got Sandman who can just turn into a giant sand monster. Must have been a nightmare for Spidey.
Oh, absolutely. It showed that even brute strength, when used cleverly, could challenge even the most agile heroes.
Okay, so Sandman can throw down. What about Clayface? Any battles that really stand out?
For Clayface, there's the Mudpack storyline where a bunch of different Clayfaces team up under Basil Karlo. It's pure chaos, and it showcases just how adaptable and terrifying he can be when he's working with others.
So teamwork makes the dream work, even for shape-shifting villains. But I feel like there's more to these guys than just punching and shape-shifting. Their stories both have this underlying sense of tragedy, don't they?
Yeah, you're picking up on something important. It's not all fun and games with these guys. There's a real depth to them.
Like Sandman, he's constantly struggling to escape his criminal past. He wants to be good, but he keeps getting pulled back into darkness.
He's literally made of conflicts, unable to solidify into the person he wants to be. And it's heartbreaking because you can see he's not entirely bad. He has this love for his daughter that makes him relatable. He wants to be a better man, but his powers, his past, they just keep dragging him down.
And then there's Clayface. He's consumed by vanity and loss. He longs for his former life, his beauty and fame. But the more he uses his powers, the more monstrous he becomes.
It's like a vicious cycle. He's trying to reclaim his lost humanity, but he just keeps losing himself further in the process.
Wait, if we tie that back to what you said about Sandman being all brute force, is it possible that Clayface's mimicry, his obsession with becoming other people, is because he can't stand being himself?
Whoa, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a brilliant insight. Sandman's outward chaos reflects his inner turmoil, while Clayface's constant transformation is a way of escaping himself entirely.
Man, that adds a whole other layer to this matchup. It's not just about who would win in a fight. It's about two guys who are fundamentally broken, each trapped by their powers in completely different ways.
And that makes their hypothetical showdown even more intriguing. It becomes a clash of not just powers, but of these deep-seated psychological traumas.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We've got Sandman the conflicted brute versus Clayface the identity thief, both battling their inner demons as much as each other.
This is getting good.
Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of how a fight would actually play out, let's take a quick pause.
Sounds good. I need to process all of this.
When we come back, we'll analyze their powers in depth and try to predict who would come out on top in different scenarios. Stick around.
Okay, so let's get back into this Sandman versus Clayface showdown. We've covered their origins, their personalities, their whole tragic backstories, and how those play into their fighting styles. But now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
You mean the superpowers?
Exactly. Let's break down their powers and how those might clash in different scenarios.
I'm all for it. From what we've discussed so far, it seems like Sandman has the edge in pure strength and durability.
Yeah, he's a powerhouse.
I mean, the guy can turn into a giant sand monster. He can control massive amounts of sand, and he can hit like a runaway freight train made of rocks. Plus, he's basically immortal.
All true. Sandman's raw power is definitely a force to be reckoned with, but Clayface is no slouch either.
Yeah, he's got some tricks up his sleeve.
He's got super strength and durability of his own, and that shape-shifting ability makes him incredibly versatile.
So he could try to match Sandman's size.
Exactly. He could transform into a giant amorphous blob, or use his elasticity to dodge Sandman's attacks and then counter with surprising speed.
But Sandman can control his density, right? Couldn't he just make himself super dense like a living statue and just become invulnerable?
He could. Sandman can become denser than a diamond, but that also makes him less mobile.
Ah, so it's a trade-off.
Exactly. And Clayface isn't just going to stand there punching a brick wall. He's going to use his mimicry to try and trick Sandman or exploit his weaknesses.
Speaking of weaknesses, Sandman's pretty vulnerable to water, right?
Yeah, that's his Achilles heel. Turns into useless mud when he gets soaked.
I remember that from the comics and even the Spider-Man movies. Could Clayface use that against him somehow?
Absolutely. Clayface has shown some pretty impressive control over his form. He could try to absorb water from the environment and use it to attack Sandman from a distance, or even try to trap him in a watery environment.
Now that would be an epic battle. A giant sand monster versus a watery blob thing.
It'd be visually stunning. But let's not forget about Clayface's toxic variations.
Oh, right. Some versions of him are poisonous to the touch. Yeah. Could he just poison Sandman and be done with it?
Potentially. If he has those toxic properties, it could definitely be a game changer. Sandman's regeneration is amazing, but even he might not be able to shrug off a potent toxin.
This is getting intense. It's like a chess match with superpowers.
Exactly. Every move could be countered. Every attack could have unintended consequences. But remember we were just talking about how Sandman's powers reflect his inner chaos, and how Clayface's mimicry is tied to his self-loathing? If we factor in those psychological elements, things get even more interesting.
You're right. It's not just about who punches harder. It's about their mental states, their motivations. How would those play out in a fight?
Well, Sandman's desire for redemption could actually be a weakness.
Really? How so?
He might hesitate to use lethal force or become easy prey for manipulation if Clayface played on his guilt or his love for his daughter.
Oh, man. Clayface could literally turn into Sandman's daughter and exploit that emotional bond to break him. That's cold.
It's brutal, but it's a possibility. And on the flip side, Clayface, with his vanity and obsession with his lost humanity, could be prone to fits of rage or despair, especially if Sandman managed to damage his form or mock his appearance.
So you're saying a simple, hey, Mudface taunt could send Clayface into a blind fury.
Exactly. His self-image is incredibly fragile. A blow to his pride could make him lash out recklessly or doubt his own abilities.
Wow, so it's not just about raw power or strategy, it's about emotional resilience. Who can maintain their composure under pressure?
That's a key factor. And let's not forget about the environment.
Right. We talked about deserts favoring Sandman and cities favoring Clayface. But what about other locations? What if they fought in a forest or underwater or even in a crowded stadium?
Ooh, those are great scenarios. A forest would be a wild card. They could both use the environment to their advantage. Sandman could control the soil and create traps, while Clayface could camouflage himself among the trees, become a living, breathing horror movie.
That's terrifying.
And underwater, Sandman would be at a disadvantage, but Clayface might be able to adapt his form to move more effectively in that fluid environment. Imagine him turning into a giant, monstrous kraken, dragging Sandman down into the depths.
Okay, now I'm getting chills.
Yeah.
That's terrifyingly awesome.
And a crowded stadium. That would be a nightmare scenario for everyone involved.
It would be pure chaos. But Clayface could potentially thrive in that environment. He could blend into the crowd, use mimicry to create diversions, or even turn into a giant monster to sow panic.
This is blowing my mind. The more we explore this matchup, the less it's about a clear winner, and the more it becomes a study of these two incredibly complex characters.
I know, right? It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this hypothetical battle so much fun to dissect. It's not a simple equation with a predictable outcome. It's a multi-layered scenario with endless variables and a range of potential outcomes.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure comic book come to life, and we, the readers, get to imagine all the different ways it could play out. That's what I love about these deep dives. We're not just rehashing old stories, we're engaging with these characters on a deeper level, analyzing their motivations, speculating about their potential. It's like we're participating in the creative process.
I totally agree. And that's what makes comic books so enduring. They invite us to use our imaginations to explore different possibilities and to ask, what if? And in a battle as unpredictable as this one, the answer to that question is limited only by our own creativity.
I'm with you there. We've analyzed their powers, their weaknesses, their fighting styles, even their psychological profiles. But before we wrap up this epic showdown, I want to touch on something we haven't really discussed yet, their motivations.
Oh yeah. Why are they even fighting? What are the stakes?
That's a crucial question, and it could drastically influence the outcome of the battle. Are they fighting for personal gain? Are they trying to protect someone? Or are they simply caught up in a conflict that's bigger than themselves? The why behind their fight could change everything.
Okay, so let's play out a few scenarios. What if Sandman is trying to protect his daughter, and Clayface has been hired to kidnap her? That would give Sandman a huge emotional incentive to fight, even if he's outmatched.
Absolutely, he'd be fighting with everything he's got. And what if Clayface is seeking revenge against someone who wronged him in the past, and Sandman is trying to stop him from carrying out a vendetta? That adds a whole new layer of moral complexity.
Ooh, good point.
Yeah.
It's not a clear-cut good guy versus bad guy scenario anymore. It's two forces of nature, both fueled by their own pain and desires, clashing in this morally gray area.
And what if they're both being manipulated by a third party forced to fight each other for someone else's amusement or profit?
That would make it even more tragic. Yeah. They'd be caught up in a conflict they didn't choose.
Imagine the emotional fallout for Sandman if he discovered he was tricked into endangering his daughter, or for Clayface if he realized he was being used to harm innocents.
Wow. Suddenly, this battle becomes less about who wins and more about who survives both physically and emotionally. It's like we're not just watching a fight, we're witnessing a tragedy unfold.
And that's the power of these characters and their stories. They tap into something deeper, something universal about the human experience. The struggle for redemption, the battle against our inner demons, and the hope that even in the darkest of times, we can find a way to rise above our past and become something more. So we've explored all these what-ifs about a Sandman Clayface showdown, but there's one question we haven't really tackled head on.
You mean, can these guys ever actually be redeemed?
Exactly. I mean, they've both done some seriously bad stuff. Can they ever come back from being shape-shifting supervillains?
It makes you wonder, where do you even begin to atone for all that chaos they've caused?
It's a question that really gets at the heart of heroism and villainy. Sandman and Clayface, they've committed terrible acts driven by desperation, anger, or just a completely messed up sense of self.
Yeah, but they've also shown moments of humanity, a desire to break free from those cycles of violence.
Right, like Sandman's love for his daughter.
There's real tenderness there, a desire to protect and provide. You wouldn't expect that from a guy who can turn into a giant sand monster.
Exactly. And those times he's teamed up with heroes to fight a bigger threat. It shows he's capable of choosing the greater good, even if it's temporary.
And even Clayface. In some versions, he expresses regret for what he's done, a longing for the life he lost.
There's that flicker of humanity buried beneath all that clay. It's almost like they're both battling their own nature, constantly fighting the monster within.
But is that even possible? Can you really change who you are at your core, especially when your powers seem to push you towards darkness?
What's interesting is that both Sandman and Clayface are trapped by their transformations. Sandman is bound to his sand form, always shifting, never able to grasp a normal life.
And Clayface, he's both physically and mentally warped by that clay-like state. They're both in this constant state of flux. It makes it so hard for them to find stability, let alone pursue redemption.
It's like their powers are both a blessing and a curse. They give them incredible abilities, but they also isolate them from the world. It's a vicious cycle of power and alienation.
And that isolation pushes them back towards villainy. Sandman, even when he tries to go straight, often ends up back in the game. It's like the world just won't let him be anything else.
In Clayface, consumed by loss and that grotesque form, he lashes out in anger and despair. The very things he uses to define himself become his prison.
They're both trapped in these destructive cycles, trying to escape themselves. Does that mean redemption is impossible? Are they forever doomed to be villains?
It's a question that comic book writers have explored in different ways over the years. Some stories offer a glimmer of hope, suggesting that with the right support and a strong enough will, they might be able to find a path towards redemption.
Like in that Gauntlet storyline where Sandman risks everything to help his daughter, even if it means sacrificing his own freedom. It shows that even a villain like him can act selflessly driven by love and a desire to make amends.
Exactly. It shows that core of humanity that even his powers can't completely erase. And for Clayface, those arcs where he briefly joins Batman's team, however short-lived, they hint at a capacity for good buried beneath all that tragedy and monstrosity. It's like he gets a glimpse of what it means to be a hero, but something always pulls him back.
It's like they're both reaching for something they can't quite grasp. A chance at a different life that's always just out of reach. Makes you wonder if they're even aware of their own potential for good.
And that's what makes their struggle so compelling. It's not a simple binary of good versus evil. It's this nuanced exploration of human nature, the constant push and pull between darkness and light.
Can we ever truly escape the consequences of our past?
It's a big question, right?
So can Sandman and Clayface ever truly achieve lasting redemption?
I think the answer is, it depends. It depends on the writer, the story, the choices they make. Maybe that's the most thought-provoking takeaway from this whole deep dive. We've seen them at their best and worst. We've analyzed their powers and motivations, and we've grappled with this question of their redemption.
But ultimately, their fate is a story that's still being written.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of it. It's open-ended.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from sand manipulation to identity theft to the complexities of redemption.
It's been a journey. But it's a reminder that even in the world of supervillains, there's still that spark of humanity, a possibility for change. Even those who seem lost can find their way back.
And sometimes the most compelling battles are the ones we fight within ourselves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our Sandman versus Clayface deep dive. But this is just the beginning of our exploration into the comic book multiverse. Join us next time as we tackle another epic matchup, uncovering the secrets and the struggles and the enduring power of these iconic characters.
See you next time.
Until then, keep those imaginations firing. And remember, even in the face of adversity, the potential for change for something better is always there.